Hello there, welcome to Saberduelgaming, where we always take the high ground. I don't normally do arcade games, even if those arcade games are later ported onto consoles, but on this case I'm going to make an exception. I am a big Marvel fan after all, so let's take a look at The Punisher, our retro review of the arcade, Sega Genesis and PlayStation 4 port. So The Punisher is of course one of Marvel's darker characters. In this game, it is a side-scrolling beat-em-up and occasionally shoot-em-up. It was originally released in the arcades, later ported about 2 years later, I believe, to the Mega Drive, and many years later to the PS4 as part of that Marvel vs. Capcom collection. I am going to do my best to capture the feeling of all three versions of this game. I played it in the arcade, and I did play it on the PS4. I didn't play it on the Sega Mega Drive, however I am aware that there are some minor lag differences between that and the other ports, so we'll talk a bit about that too. So let's try and set the scene. This game was released into arcades in 1993 and was ported onto the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis in 1995. This was a time when Marvel Comics were kind of at their peak. The X-Men and Spider-Man cartoons had become massively popular, and this had attracted a lot more young people towards the actual comics. Suddenly, people were more aware of a lot more characters than just Spider-Man and the Hulk, Marvel's two most famous ones. The X-Men, because of the cartoon, got some attention, and a lot of young kids, young people who were looking for something a bit grittier, also came across The Punisher. Now, The Punisher is not a superhero, he's more of an anti-hero. This is a guy looking for revenge, and he is out to avenge the deaths of his children, and this game actually covers that. This game actually shows you within the intro that his family were killed by criminals, mob guys, so this is pretty dark by comparison to a lot of the other superhero games we'd see at the time. But whilst it had that dark mentality, and fairly violent, I mean, that clip there, although we don't see blood, we're seeing the machine guns cut through his family. It's pretty brutal. However, the game is still actually quite bright, vivid, and, for its topic, colourful. We see the character of Frank Castle, the Punisher, drawn very well. You do also get the option, if playing a two-player game, to play as Nick Fury also. But let's be honest, we're here to play as the Punisher. Side-scrolling beat-em-ups were fairly common at this time, but superhero games in particular really took advantage of this medium. It's why other games such as Streets of Rage and Double Dragon really had to compete, because if you were going to get a side-scrolling beat-em-up, why not cross it over with one of your favourite franchises? Well, the Punisher did that very well, and it suited that style. Also, this was one of the few games that were side-scrolling beat-em-ups that also had elements of a side-scrolling shoot-em-up. Occasionally, Frank Castle, the Punisher, would stop and pick up a weapon, be it a baseball bat, a blade, but often it would be a gun, pistol or machine gun, and for a brief period of time, he would be able to shoot. This was something of a novelty because most games of this type were either side-scrolling shoot-em-ups or side-scrolling beat-em-ups. It was very rare to see one that had elements of both. If you were a fan of the comics, you would recognise quite a few characters within this. We have Kingpin, Jigsaw, and a fair few others from the comics. I'm even pretty sure I saw a Reaver in this, which was from the X-Men cartoons and comics. If that's not who they're meant to be, I stand corrected, but I swear, looks exactly like them. In between levels, we get very comic book style cutscenes that, whilst animated, do very much feel like you're watching an animated comic book. It really helps fit that style, so if you were a Punisher fan, you were going to get everything you needed from this, and to be fair, if you weren't, it was still going to be an enjoyable beat-em-up. There's the Reaver thing I was talking about before. I swear that's in the X-Men cartoons. But how was this game received when it was released? Well, we kinda have to look at this across a couple of different levels. We have the arcade release, the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive release, and I suppose then the PlayStation 4 release, can kinda show us how it stands up to modern scrutiny. So let's start back with the arcade game. Well, the 1993 arcade release garnered nothing but praise. In Japan, on its release month, it was one of the top 10 most played games in the arcades. GameFan stated that it was potentially one of the greatest side-scrolling beat-em-ups of all time, and one of the bloodiest since Mortal Kombat, and I'm pretty sure they meant that as a compliment. In fact, I can't see a bad word said about the arcade game. It just got rave reviews. The Sega Mega Drive version? Not so much. It didn't get bad reviews, they just weren't good. It tended to get scores between 67 to the mid-70s. It was described as perfectly serviceable, and at other times a little bit bland visually. However, I am going to jump into the defense of the Genesis Mega Drive port a little bit here. First of all, this port came out 2 years after the original arcade release, and whilst we were still on 16-bit games, they were coming along leaps and bounds by the month, so the game had already dated pretty poorly, and that's before they had to try and cram it into a 16-bit console. Also, some of the criticism was about how some of the special moves were a bit tricky, and that's more to do with the Sega Mega Drive's limited control pad. Bear in mind the Super Nintendo, like a lot of arcade controllers did at the time, had upwards of 6 or more different buttons that could be used. Sega Mega Drive only had 3. That did massively limit what you could do on it. An interesting point on this is, because it sold quite poorly for the Sega Mega Drive, it would actually go on to be one of the rarest PAL released games on that console, meaning that whilst people may not have reflected on it very well back then, it's now become something of a very special collector's item, so I guess it won out in the end. The PS4 version of the game, which we got on the Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection Arcade Classics, boy that's one hell of a long title, is the arcade game in its purest and finest form. So the only question is, does it stand the test of time? And I'm not even going to waste your time, it absolutely does. There's something about these side-scrolling beat-em-ups that are just timeless. If the graphics are pretty decent, and the gameplay works and the controls are effective, well then these games are just as good in 2025 as they were back in 1995. You can't mess with perfection, and these games really were perfected back then. Overall, this is a game that is an absolute joy to play now, and I would happily play this in the arcade today, but I don't have to, because I've got it on the PlayStation. And for the record, on that PS4 re-release, that collection of games, this really stands out because all the others are 1v1 fighting games. It makes this one pretty damn special in that collection, so it's certainly one to hold on to, and if you have a physical copy of it, keep tight hold, because as we said before, it could be worth a small fortune. So when reviewing this game, I'm gonna try and balance out the arcade and the PS4 release along with the Genesis game and come to some sort of compromise. I'd happily have given the main version to this an 8.5 or a 9 out of 10, so factoring in the Genesis, let's go 8 out of 10. Why not? Anyway, have you played this game before? What do you think of it? Comment below and let me know. And if you played the Genesis version of the game, please let me know what you thought of that, as I'm going off second-hand information for that. Until next time, thanks for watching and take the high ground.